just so excited to welcome everybody here for this this evening's event. We wish we could do it in person, and are glad we're able to do it in this way, and also knowing that there's so many people in our community dealing with challenging health situations right now. We wish everybody refuah shleima and full recovery. We're so excited to welcome you here. I'm Rabbi Rob Scheinberg, United Synagogue of Hoboken, and before I introduce our speaker, Dr. Ross Ellenhorn, I would love to share with you a little bit about how this evening came to be, and about the year-long project that this evening is a culmination of what we've been working on for this year. So it was almost 3 years ago when psychology professor Kent Harbour of Rutgers University, as part of our synagogue community, who's here with us today, that he and I started some conversations about the relationship between Judaism and psychology. And among other things, we noticed that there appeared to be a disproportionate number of people in our synagogue community who work in some way with behavioral science and mental health. The research scholars in psychology and neuroscience, as well as clinical psychologists and social workers and educators and chaplains. And we thought, wouldn't it be great to bring all these people together to study Jewish texts with an eye towards the psychological insights that we could gain from them? So we were delighted to be accepted into a national program called Scientists in Synagogues, which is coordinated by the organization Sinai and Synapses. And we're so happy that Rabbi Jeff Middleman, who's the director of this organization, is with us today. And we're just very, very grateful to you. So over the last year, about once a month, our group met on Zoom, because we had to do it on Zoom. That was not the original plan, though. We met for some deep and illuminating discussions of insights from the world of behavioral science and from Jewish texts, led by people from our group who are speaking from their areas of special interest and expertise. So I can just share with you just a couple of the kinds of topics that we addressed. We had sessions, for example, on justice, on conflict, on consciousness, and on courage, and on trauma. And at times we noticed that the Jewish texts that we were looking at were remarkably in sync with findings of psychology and neuroscience. We also found that there were some points when it looked like this was less true, but it was so clear that so many of the questions that were raised by traditional Jewish texts corresponded so closely with the questions that we saw raised also in the behavioral science literature, including how can people best resolve their conflicts? How do people respond after trauma? How do we define courage, and how do people develop courage? What's the role of punishment in cultivating a just society? And topic like what we're addressing tonight, how do we encourage people to change or support people as they make efforts to change? And it was really enlightening to bring these disciplines into dialogue with each other. And we're so grateful to all the people who participated in the program, whose names, and many of whom are with us today, right now, whose names are now up on the screen. And a special word of appreciation to Kent Harbour and Razel Solo, who chaired this effort and helped to design our program, though the topics and all the presentations were done by the participants. And also to Gail Rosenbaum, who's providing some tech assistance this evening. And so all of the Minds and Midrash participants over the course of this whole year, we've learned so much from you, and we're really so grateful. And I'm so excited to be introducing Ross Ellenhorn now, who's our speaker for this evening. And we'll also note, as it will become clear from the presentation, that there are so many elements of Kent Harbour's research which find their way also into Dr. Ellenhorn's writings. Dr. Ross Ellenhorn was trained as a sociologist and psychotherapist and social worker, and founded the Ellenhorn community-based mental health program with locations in Boston and New York and Los Angeles. And it's a remarkable, innovative approach to helping mental health clients to remain integrated in the world as they are treated for their treatments. And we're so glad that he'll be sharing insights from his book, How We Change and the 10 Reasons Why We Don't. was published in 2020. It is an extraordinary book drawn from Dr. Ellenhorn's abundant experience helping people to achieve the life change that they seek, and also deeply and compassionately understanding what so often blocks all of our efforts to change. This is a book with so many deep resonances to Jewish ideas and texts. And it's of relevance, certainly, to anybody who's ever made a New Year's resolution in January or engaged in the process of teshuvah, repentance, return, and renewal, this characteristic of the Jewish high holidays in the fall. So per our Minds of Midrash method that we've been using for our sessions throughout this year, Dr. Ellenhorn will speak. Following his presentation, I'm going to share some thoughts drawn from Jewish tradition to begin our dialogue, and we look forward also to questions from our community to be directed and some general conversation. So I'm so happy to turn it over now to Dr. Ross Ellenhorn.
Well, thank you very much. So I thought I'd just mention something kind of important tonight, because I think it resonates a little bit about how we think about fear of hope and hope in general, and that's that it's January 6th. And a lot of us are kind of contemplating what hope means on this date. And I'm actually a pretty hopeful person. And I thought about it today a little bit, about sort of contemplating what's happening today and what happened a year ago. And I don't find that my hope has dropped. Hope is this kind of state that can be consistent in our lives despite all of the challenges to it. I just can't find where to put my hope. I can't find a place to put it and say things are hopeful and moving that direction. But it sits there kind of in my consciousness and my experience. And that's an important way of kind of understanding hope, is that it's more a position or a mindset towards things. It's very different than optimism, which is sort of like everything's going to be great. It's really kind of this position really towards uncertainty, and I'll get to that in a little bit. What we know about hope is that it is really this kind of remarkable social psychological resource. There's certain social psychological resources like self-esteem and social support that kind of create these boosters to our psychology. Hopeful people feel more self-efficacy, meaning they can kind of feel like they're competent in life, more self-esteem, more self-confidence, more sense of control. They cope better. They have less dysphoria. They're less pessimistic, less self-blame. They have less depression, less anxiety, less hostility, and less stress. These are really good things that hope brings to us. And so we have this idea that kind of hope creates this resource for us. And when we're not hopeful, that resource goes away. And one of the things that Kent and I are interested in is whether there's a third element in this, which is when hope scares you, when you're frightened of it, when you have fear of hope, does it get in the way of that resource getting to you? And this image of this person here is really the image of somebody who sees the well for motivation, the light for motivation, as poisoned. And so the very thing that moves us forward in life is the thing that they're terrified of. Now, this is stuff that I've sort of generated working with people with severe psychiatric issues who have gone through major kind of experiences of disappointment in their lives. But I actually feel like this idea of fear of hope applies to all of us. All of us have some level of fear of hope. You never hear a theologian say, go out there and hope and it's easy. It's always connecting a sense of courage to hope. Hope is not an easy event. And so we've developed this tool for fear of hope. And what we found in the development of this tool is some interesting things about what fear of hope is not. It is not fear of success. It is not fear of failure. It is not anxiety. It is not depression. And most remarkably, and most excitingly to us, actually, because it tells an interesting story, it's not hopelessness. And what we've discovered is that people with a high level of hope and a high level of fear of hope are actually the people that are having the hardest time in a lot of ways, that they're having this agitated experience. One of the main things we see is that they engage in a lot of counterfactuals, which means I wish I had done that, or I wish I hadn't done that. I wish this had happened. I wish this hadn't happened. Things could have been different if this happened. There's a little bit of a rumination to all of that. They have a poor relationship to their emotions. They feel less self-efficacious. They don't feel like they're competent in the world. They have less resources like social support and self-esteem. They have a shorter time perspective. When you ask them to think about the future, they think about things sort of in the immediate future. You think about the past, you think about things a little bit in the sort of the immediate past. And that might fit with the idea that they also rank high in stuckness. They're sort of stuck in one place. They don't locate positive events about to happen, less so than someone that's hopeless. If you think about it like a graduation's coming up, a hopeless person's like, yeah, graduation's coming up. A person who's scared of hope, they might want to ignore that graduation because that's this hopeful event. They don't want to be involved in something that's raising their hopes or getting them excited. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this work, and this is important now, but I'll get to it later, is this idea that the high hope and high fear of hope gets to counterfactuals. It gets to counterfactuals in this way, and this will become important later. It gets to counterfactuals through this poor relationship with emotions. That people with high hope and high fear of hope, they develop this poor relationship to their emotions, and something about that gets them to this point of counterfactuals. All of these things end up with a story about somebody that's like a high diver who's afraid of heights. And so when we think about people who are kind of stuck, even in our own lives where we're stuck, where we're kind of passive about things, maybe something's going on that's actually not passive, that's kind of agitated, a contemplation about, what will I do? Will I actually make this leap? Will I actually move forward? And then the fear of what happens if I begin to hope? What happens if the thing I do is successful? And then I have to hope more. And so this becomes this thing that we constantly thinking about, constantly ruminating about, this feeling like there's something dangerous in the next step. And the people around us say things like, just make a decision, just move forward. But in reality, this is a very kind of tough situation when you're thinking about how to hope again, and how to hope, and how to follow your hope. So I have a definition for hope, and I call it a mindset that pulls you through uncertainty and towards something you long for. But I think that hope is the mindset we use to get ourselves through uncertainty. You really can't be certain and hopeful. If you say this is exactly going to happen tomorrow, there's no need to hope at that point. So uncertainty is a lot like despair in that way. You don't really hope except in relationship to despair. This idea that we got to kind of pull ourselves through uncertainty is really important when we think about kind of changing socially, changing our social environments, and changing ourselves. Is how do you move through that moment between the decision to do something and the thing you want to get to? There has to be this hope that's kind of pulling you through. And I believe that that's actually beginning at a very young age. There's a lot of talk these days about attachment and what happens in the attachment between infants and their parents and what this does to their sort of sense of attachments later on. You see that child's hoping at that moment, hoping that there'll be a response and taking the risk that there won't be a response. Now, I'm a kind of devotee to hope, and so I see it everywhere. And I wonder sometimes when we talk about attachment events, if we're not talking about hope events. I took the risk to try to make contact, and then that was spoiled by a non-response. Or if I was lucky, there was a response, but it takes that hope. And there's all these little moments of hope in our childhood and in our infancy of gesturing to make something happen. If you're to take the typical hope scale, you would take the Schneider's hope scale. And what he says is that you can kind of indicate that a person has hope by these two really interesting things. One is that hopeful people are always looking for alternative pathways. If there's something blocking them, they're figuring out a way around them. They're always trying to think about the next thing that they can try. And what supports that is also what he calls agency thinking. They kind of have this sense that they can do it, this kind of sense of confidence that they can do it. And those are the two things that are kind of part of hope. You take that scale and you rate high on those, he's going to say you're a hopeful person. Interestingly enough, those are the two things that are really necessary to do something that's central to being a human being. Human beings collaborate to invent. We're the one animal that collaborates to invent. Other animals collaborate, other animals invent, but they don't collaborate to invent. And that takes two things: thinking in alternative pathways, believing you have something to contribute to that collaboration, and actually a third thing, being able to walk through uncertainty. We're here trying to figure this out. We don't know where it's going, and we're collaborating at this moment to get to that point. So again, because I'm a little bit of a fanatic about hope, I see it there too. I see it kind of in the very center of what makes us human, is this kind of capacity for hope. When you hope for something, you're longing for something. And there's an interesting dynamic to hope, which is that when you hope, you appoint something as important. So it's your birthday, your parents ask you what you want, you have no idea, and then you finally say bike, and all of a sudden bike becomes this major thing you have to have in life. And you also notice that you're bike-less. And so now you're in a state of something important and life-giving you need because you're hoping for it, and something you know that if you don't get, you're going to lack that thing in your life. And that makes hoping a risk, because every time you hope, you're appointing something as important, and you're noticing that you lack it. And there's a potential you won't get it. And then you'll see that in your life, there's this missing element. This is a bit of my idol. This is Harold and the Purple Crayon. I don't know if you know those books, but I'm publishing a book on him this year. And this is such an image of what it's like to hope, is that you're facing uncertainty and you're going up and up and up and up and up. And every chance there is that you'll fall. But the thing that you want won't happen. So we have this idea of alternative pathways, uncertainty, and this idea of agency thinking, that you have this sense in yourself that you can make it through. And that even if the bad things happen, that you're going to be okay. And that's this other term in the middle of hope. At the core of it is faith in. Faith in yourself and also faith in others. That I'll be okay if this thing doesn't happen. And that I can handle the uncertainty as I go through. So faith is kind of the central element in hoping. It's really very close. Again, I've been using this word a lot, to self-efficacy, which is just like, I think I can face this task and be able to get through it, accomplish it. And faith is also a gut response. It's an emotional response. You're dependent on kind of a gut feeling at that point. And you're relying on affect as information when you have faith. You're relying on your emotions at points of faith. They become your data. This is going to become important later on. So when you hope, you appoint something as important. When it doesn't happen, there's disappointment. We use that word all the time for all kinds of things, but I'm talking about a profound disappointment. This is the blank face experiment. A lot of you probably know this. The mother's been asked not to respond to the child. And watch all the alternative pathways this child takes. He's disappointed, so he tries another one. Doesn't work. Tries another one. Now he's getting upset. Tries clapping. Doesn't work. Tries screaming. Starts looking for somebody else. And then falls into something close to despair. What I think is going on at that point is a profound sense of helplessness. I can't get my needs met. I live in a world where I can't get my needs met. And that experience of disappointment from hope, the feeling of helplessness, it doesn't belong to children, it belongs to all of us. When we hope big and we're disappointed, the injury is to our sense of our competency and our ability to make our lives work. And the pain is the pain of helplessness. I can't make this happen. What we know about children is they choose these two ways around having that experience of helplessness. And these are kind of the classic old studies. One is analytic depression, which is just to stop doing anything. It's better to be kind of numb and not have any experience than reach out and try and then have that experience that, oh my Lord, I can't make my life work. And the other is avoidant attachment. I'll just start not trying to connect because I'm so kind of concerned that I'll be disappointed again and have this experience of helplessness. Well, something else is going on here, which is that these emotions that got the child or us to move forward, this faith in ourselves, they actually brought us to a lot of pain. And so we begin to distrust our emotions. And so this affect as information becomes fake news. I don't know if I can trust this. And that's where we end up with this story, I think, which is that we have a poor relationship to our emotions then, and we begin to engage in those counterfactuals. What if that had happened? What if this had happened? What if I had done that? What if she had done that? There's this remarkably tragic event going on that was going on in Sweden. I think it's still going on, called resignation syndrome. And these are Syrian refugee children. And they actually would arrive in Sweden and kind of integrate into the schools and do okay. And their parents would apply for citizenship and get rejected. And then they would appeal. And at the point of the appeal, the children would go to sleep. And they would sleep for a year. And they wouldn't kind of feel anything when they were touched, but they were sleeping. And the psychiatrist in Sweden said this is the healthiest thing they can do. They're just trying not to kind of be in the world right now because they cannot bear this kind of hope and waiting and all that. And the remarkable thing is that they wake up back to the kids they were once the parents get asylum, if the parents do. They somehow know through something, the movements of the parents, the way they're being touched, they begin to kind of wake up again. So everything I told you, I think it's sort of true for children, but it's a metaphor too for all our disappointments, all our experiences. These things don't go away. They're not just traits. They're states. They're things that happen to us, and we can kind of become afraid of hope. And as adults, we're our own parents. We're our own reflection, and we have to depend on ourselves. And so this issue of helplessness becomes really important to us. It's what's called existential anxiety. I'm alone in the world on some level. I mean, I have supports and all that, but I'm kind of accountable in a lot of ways to make my life work. And that's terrifying. This accountability becomes this really kind of important element in my book about the 10 reasons not to change. There's basically the father of social psychology, like Kurt Lewin, who had this idea about force fields. And he said that for all of us, there is a place between forces that are restraining us and forces that are pushing us forward. And those forces are not just in our heads. The forces have to do with all kinds of stuff around us. And so each of our field, this field that we're sitting in, as we try to kind of move forward in life, belongs to us. It's unique to each of us. And so you set a goal and you can't get to it. The reason why you're not getting to that goal is because you're tied up in this tension between these restraining forces and these forces pushing you forward. But I believe that in all of us, these two things are always there, which is hope is one of the forces that's pushing you forward. It's the thing you use to get through uncertainty. And your terror about your accountability is always pushing down, because hope reminds you that you're in charge. And so hope generates, in some ways, that terror. And so you've got this thing always pushing you down and this thing always pushing you up. But if you begin to have these experiences of helplessness, the anxiety wins out. And you begin to not move forward. This is an example of the opposite. Harold draws his life. He's in charge of his life. He draws a tree. He draws a dragon to protect the tree. He forgets he drew the dragon. So he gets scared. His hand begins to shake in anxiety. He creates a sea of anxiety. He begins to drown in it. But he's efficacious enough to build a boat to get out. He still has some sense of that he can make his life work. So when we're seeing somebody who's kind of stuck, and when we're stuck in our own lives, it's my belief that that dynamic is what's going on, is that we're struggling between the wish to hope and then the terror of hope, and then this sense of our own accountability. And two things happen when we're engaged in the spirit of hope. Something very close to anaclitic depression, which is we get unmotivated. And the other is we have a perturbed relationship with the people that help us. We don't want their help. They scare us. Hopeful people are the scariest people to us. So I developed this idea around, I don't know, 25 years ago in this program, and I asked people who had been treated for psychiatric diagnoses for long periods of time, what are the things that get in the way of you changing? And that's the stuff that I took and then sort of added to my newer book, which is about all of us. And they never talked about their diagnoses. They talked about these things. These are the 10 reasons not to change. I don't want to get excited about my life again. I don't want to raise my expectations and then be hurt by them again and have that sense of helplessness. I don't want other people getting excited for me. I don't want to have that experience of letting them down again. I don't want to look at where I am in life. And if I begin to change, I have to kind of face that. And hope's going to kind of bring up this sense that I've got a long way to go to my goals. I'll have to take these small steps, and each one will feel insulting to where I want to be. I have to be accountable for what's next. If I kind of get better at life, people are going to see it, and I'm going to see it, and I'm going to expect more out of myself, leading to more disappointment. The world will become unknown to me. And that means a world of all these potential disappointments. I'll have to face that I'm kind of driving this bus. I'll lose a kind of support around me of people that are worried about me. I'll lose a sense that people are kind of have me in their minds if I do well. And one person said, I'll destroy the negatives. This is back when we had negatives in film, and what they were talking about is the bad things that happen to me, people won't see anymore. Now, some of these may not apply to all of us. Some of them maybe apply to psychiatric patients, but I believe a lot of them apply, at least to my own life, to the reasons why I don't move forward. I also think that when someone doesn't move forward, they're doing something actually kind of beautiful and caring and loving of themselves. Because what are they protecting? When they're trying to protect themselves from disappointment, what are they protecting? I think they're protecting hope. They're trying to make sure that they can hold on to whatever hope they have, because they're not sure if the next disappointment will take that from them. And so when we're stopping ourselves, there's actually something kind of self-loving to it, because we're trying to kind of hold on to this very valuable thing in our lives. And so what's the right way to help a person who is struggling with this? It's remarkable how little it'll help to talk to them about, you just got to hope, or you just got to do that thing, because they're struggling with this tremendous fear of doing it. And here is sort of how it looks to cajole somebody, I think, into hoping or to moving forward, which is the same thing, to trying again. No, in my field, we call that resistance. We have all kinds of names for it. We have some really horrible names like non-compliance and things like that. But in reality, this gentleman's trying to he's contemplating jumping, and things are getting worse for him as his friend kindly tries to talk him into it. And he's up there thinking he's going to do it. But this cajoling into jumping is the thing that's terrifying him most. And this is the trap we get into when we try to kind of talk people into hoping or changing. Right? Now, remember, those 10 reasons not to change are all about that every time you change, you're raising hope. And a person who's terrified of hope is terrified of change because of that. I'm not going to get too far into some of the ideas on how to help with this, because I'm sort of more interested in just talking to you about this idea of fear of hope. And I can send out recordings of my longer talks, but you really can't help people with hope. You can't get them to generate more hope, but you can help them with faith. And by the way, that's the pit in the peach, because Kent told me it looks like a nut, which would be a horrible thing to be putting up there. You can help people with faith. But faith is really the center to what fear of hope is about, is that the person's faith in themselves. Can I pull myself out if there is disappointment? What some people call ontological security, in a way. Can I keep kind of moving forward in the world even when bad things happen? It's kind of the central thing that needs to happen. And remarkably, this is what we find. There's these things in therapy called common factors. It turns out that all this talk these days about best practices in psychology, that only 15% of it has to do with the best practices. Most of it have to do with relationships that are about a person who has faith in you and a person who's your ally. We also know that most change, 40% of all change, has to do with what's happening in your life. And the more a person can feel more competent in their lives, more able to kind of manage their lives, the better off they are with fear of hope. The more self-efficacious they are, the better they are off with fear of hope. And this is really the goal. The goal is, can I have faith in myself that if I hope, if I allow myself to hope, that I'll be able to bear the disappointment, that I will not fall into this pit of deep experiences of helplessness. I want to show you one more video before we move on to discussion.
Thank you so very, very much. It gave us so much to think about and to process and hopefully to discuss. And I'd love to just share some reactions, which are primarily, I'd say, reactions to some of the material in the book, but some of the things that you shared in this presentation, and especially the diving board videos, are just so evocative for me. So first, I just want to say I found your book so perceptive and so honest, and also so deeply respectful of people who don't change and their reasons for not changing. And I just really appreciated presenting a language so that people who are essentially like they're in control of their own decision to change or not to change, and helping them to understand why it is that they don't change can also be an engine towards helping people to change. So when Razel and Kent and I discussed what are some of the ways that that we see analogs in Jewish traditional texts to the things that you spoke about, we thought of some examples of people in the Bible who seem to be stuck in a way that might correspond to fear of hope, that you've written about and talked to us about, and also that Kent has researched in the lab. People who seem to be analogous to people on the diving board who are in some cases being cajoled to jump, and then it turns out that they are resistant. I just want to share two such examples, and then to see if you think that these could be examples of fear of hope. There are two biblical examples. One is the biblical book of Jonah, whose story is read on Yom Kippur afternoon, quite likely because it's a time when we're focused on thinking about ourselves and making change. Jonah is called by God to speak to the people of Nineveh and warn them that they've been wicked. God will call them to account, and then Jonah responds by running away. But at this point in the story, we have no idea why he's running away. He has not yet told us. He boards a ship, there's a terrible storm, and Jonah knows that the storm is his fault, and he asks the sailors to throw him overboard, and they do throw him overboard, and then he's swallowed by a fish. All this is a tremendous effort and not significant pain and discomfort to go through that Jonah is enduring just so that he can avoid doing the thing that he's been asked to do, when that thing that he's been asked to do doesn't seem all that difficult. Because then the fish spits him out onto dry land, and God again says, okay, Jonah, go to the people of Nineveh and warn them that they've been wicked and God is going to call them to account. Then finally, Jonah does what he's asked to do and talks to the people of Nineveh. And it turns out he is wildly successful at this, gets them to repent from their wicked ways. And then Jonah, in the next conversation with God, says, God, I knew this is what was going to happen, and that's why I ran away. And so it could well be, there's different interpretations of exactly why it is that Jonah doesn't want to fulfill this mission. But one possibility is that there's something about the consequences of success that are making Jonah uncomfortable. It could be, well, what is God going to ask me to do? How can I follow that up after being the most successful prophet that anybody can imagine, getting a capital city of a major empire to all change their ways? I want to just share the second example. The conversations between Moses and God at the burning bush so remind me of the scene of the two people on the diving board, where God is in the role of the one trying to encourage Moses to take on this task. So and we should note that at this point, Moses, again, is not a fearful person by nature. The first things we know about his adult life are he quickly and courageously intervenes in 3 different conflicts that could have resulted in bodily harm. He comes out on the side of the vulnerable party in each conflict. But then God gives him this role to play, and then we see that he's on the cusp of change, but he just also wants to run away. He's going to raise objection after objection for why he can't do what it is that God wants him to do. And some of these objections look to me like fear of hope, or also, I'll put on the screen some of the reasons why, according to Ross's book, people are resistant to change. So his first question is like, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the free the people? God answers and says, don't worry about it. But it may be that the answer is, you're someone who's different and more capable than who you thought you were, and that might be a scary proposition for Moses. And staying the same may protect you from sole accountability for your life. The next thing Moses says is, well, so what exactly am I supposed to say? When they say, who sent you? What exactly am I supposed to say? And God's response, which is very opaque, saying, well, my name is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be what I will be. You should tell everybody, Ehyeh, or I will be, send me to you, which is not particularly clear. And it's just a reminder that this is an assignment that involves a lot of uncertainty about the future. Even the nature of God who is sending Moses is an enigma, and that this kind of leadership task is necessarily going to include a lot of unknown and uncertainty, and that's what's involved in this process. Okay, and then Moses says, well, I've never been really good at talking. Neither in times past or now that you've spoken to your servant, I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. And lurking behind Moses' words could be a concern that if he grows in the way that God wants him to, well, again, that will set the bar higher for Moses. I found that to be a very powerful theme again in Ross's book. And there's just a quotation: when you make positive change in your life, you inevitably raise the expectations of others. Doing so, you risk that others will witness you as the author of your own life and then expect more out of you. And then what's the last thing? And here Moses says, okay, God, please just make somebody else your agent. And then I find God's response here to be kind of interesting, because God gets angry, but then God says, there's your brother Aaron. He, I know, speaks readily, even now he's setting out to meet you. He'll be happy to see you. You'll speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And at this point, the conversation is over. Whether that means that Moses has just been beaten into submission, or there's something in this conversation that changes Moses' mind. This reminded me of something, Ross, that you quoted from Kent's research, which I just want to include the whole thing here. In one study, Harbor placed a live tarantula in a clear plexiglass box attached to a fishing reel that the participant used to lower the box of tarantula towards them. People with reduced self-worth inaccurately saw the tarantula as closer to them than it actually was. Most important for our discussion, the participant's sense of self-worth at that moment was induced by Harbor and his lab mates. Those in the high self-worth sample had raised their sense of worth by recalling a time when someone helped them in a meaningful manner, while those in the low self-worth group had recalled a time when they didn't get support. And so if Moses is more likely to have the most accurate perception of what this role is going to be and what his responsibility will be when he is reminded of the connections that he has with others and the support that he can potentially have. That may be when he's most likely to take on the assignment. So I'm going to stop the sharing. I know shortly we'll have opportunity for some general questions, but I'll just pose, Ross, one question to you, which is that it seemed to me that many of the biblical examples of people who seem resistant to change, very often the change that they're being asked to do is like Moses, like leave your really happy life where you're happy and at peace for the first time in your life and fulfill this world-changing mission, which frankly is going to make you probably less satisfied than you are currently. And I'm just wondering if is it fair to use a concept like fear of hope to think about the calculation that somebody who has the opportunity to step into a major leadership position because they feel the responsibility to do so, is the concept of fear of hope relevant in such a case?
I think so. This is really great. Thank you for inviting me. This is wonderful. What I hear in that story, and with Jonah too, is kind of the fear of expansiveness. Like if I keep growing, every growth means another moment of uncertainty. Because now I'm on the edge of another growth and another moment where I have to face uncertainty. And will there be a point in that expansiveness where I'll be too big for myself? I will have gotten to a point where I can't master my own experience any longer. And all of that's requiring hope, because hope's the thing that's going to pull you through that. And also, you're going to feel resistant to hope because it's pulling you to that edge. It's pulling you towards expansiveness, being bigger than you were, being more engaged in the world, more competent, all those things that can lead to greater disappointment. That's what sort of rang in my ears when you were talking is, about getting bigger than you are right now, which is a beautiful thing to do, but it's terrifying, right? We all should be trying to be as expansive as we can, But I know in my own life, every change towards expansiveness means a combined terror that I'm now on the edge. Did I get bigger than I can handle? Does that make sense?
I think so. A comment just came in the chat that Moses may be more as afraid of fear of pain rather than of growth. I'm seeing actually
of emotional pain or physical pain or
I mean, it can also be that Moses may know that by signing up for this assignment, he is there are going to be times of severe pain for him.
Yeah.
He's probably happier before he accepts the assignment than he's ever been. Now, I remember in the conversation, Kent and Rachel, that we had beforehand, I think you had suggested that Moses might not actually have been happy if he had not accepted the assignment because he knew he had unfinished business and that it would be a source of nagging concern for him if he knew that there was something that he could do to dramatically ameliorate the condition of the world that he was not doing.
And that he was not reaching his potential. using his
Right.
talents.
Right. I mean, psychologically, that's what I think about is there's something profoundly loving about not changing, but it's a much bigger risk not to change than move forward. I mean, it's the risk of emptiness or the risk of not knowing how expansive you can become and living a life where you never got as expansive as you could. That's about as risky as you get. But it's a tricky risk because it feels so comforting to just sort of stay home. But it's really a significant one. But also both stories are about challenges where helplessness was a real potential, right? Like I go in there and I tell them this and then they all give me the finger, and it's like, I'm just, I mean, it's like each one of those are about collapse, the potential for collapse too, and I'm sure that's what was terrifying them too, right? And can I handle that? But again, that is the feeling we have at the points of growth. Okay, I'm here now. Am I competent enough to do what I just got to?
Thank you. I know we have some more questions, and I think Razel is going to be helping us to field the questions.
Hi. Yes, we have a couple so far, and I did want to encourage everybody, even as we're having this discussion, to please put your questions into the chat room, and I'll share them. So one question is, in order to free one from the blocks that occur in infancy, as in attachment disorders, do you feel that these roots need to be uncovered in order to inculcate a sense of agency? That's not an easy question. You might want to look at the chat room and look at it yourself.
I mean, that's kind of, on some level, that's a question about psychotherapy and psychology in general. And I stand on uncovering if it's the source of kind of fathoming what happened, and if it's the source of empathy for the therapist and the person, not uncovering as, oh, we finally figured out the reason why I'm who I am. That doesn't mean anything. It's a story. But fathoming, that's what it was like. And having a person there with you, fathoming with you, that's important. But I also feel that the relationship between a therapist and another person, or any kind of help another person, it can be very curative without having to go into the past. Can be very profoundly curative and can develop a person's sense of faith in themselves and self-efficacy. Did that answer it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was going to also ask you to distinguish between faith and hope. That was one question I got.
Okay. No, I can do it. Hope is this. It's a mindset or a position. It's not quite an emotion, right? It's a posture towards uncertainty, in which you're able to kind of maintain your integrity through uncertainty. Faith, and so it is a kind of moving through uncertainty without proof that you're going to make it to the other side. Faith is trusting without proof that you should trust. Mm-hmm. And so, and that drives you through hope. Like hope is sort of pulling you through, and faith is the thing that makes you feel like it's okay to follow hope because you have some trust you'll be able to pick yourself up and make it through. Well, that's they're kind of the same. They're connected. They're not separate. You can't talk about hope without talking about that pit in the middle of the peach that is faith. They're connected in that way, but they're also different.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very well explained. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but Rabbi Middleman, if you would like to ask a question before you have to go, I'm inviting you, but I know you may have to go.
Thank you. Actually, my wife actually said that.
Oops, you're off. You've muted yourself. I'm sorry. You've muted
Sorry,
yourself.
my wife actually said very graciously that she'll put the kids to bed so I can stay for the balance. And but
that's very nice of her.
yes, which is but yeah, I think that this idea of being torn is so interesting. And I'm curious. One of the things that I often think about is the idea of the Yetzer Hara, which is often described often incorrectly as the impulse to do evil. But you were talking about that motion and emotion there, and the Yetzer Hara is often viewed as a negative emotion, but it's a driver that's often described as being selfish, but it's also can be very generative. And I'm curious, either from you, Rabbi Scheinberg, or Ross, if you're able to share a little bit of how that might play in of what is the emotions that may seem to be negative, but in fact can be quite generative.
Well, I think that the emotions that a person begins to distrust when they face disappointment have to do with the emotion of attraction to something that's pulling them along, yearning, longing. These kinds of feelings become really scary. And the sense of kind of wanting, these things become the things that, oh boy, that got me in trouble last time. It's not anger that got them to hope. It's not quite happiness that got them hope. It's these kind of driving things that really led them to pain. And so they then get afraid of these very important things, right? These things that make you feel like I'm going to reach for that. I'm going to move forward towards that thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think it's those kind of emotions I'm thinking about. They're connected to hope in that way.
I have a question for you, Ross. Thank you, Rabbi Middleman. Why is it more useful to look at the reasons we don't change instead of the reasons we do change?
Because the reasons we do change are just so easy. They're just so easy. People basically change when they're ready to change. So all these books that tell you how to change, they only work for people that are ready to change. And they probably don't need to read those books, because if you're ready to change, you're going to change. But if you can get into a place of compassion for yourself about why you're not changing, you're going to get closer to being ready to change. Because if you just keep thinking about yourself as this bad person instead of, no, I'm doing this out of self-love. I'm protecting myself here. I'm doing all these things. Now, do I want to keep doing it? Maybe not. That's the place you want to be. Change happens in contemplation. It happens in the moment where you're saying, is this thing really worth doing compared to this thing? That's where it happens. And to be in a contemplative place, you can't be in this place saying, I'm a bad person because I'm doing this. And the book is actually, HarperCollins wouldn't let me call it what I wanted to call it, which was, one title was Don't Go Changing, and they didn't like that. But the other one was just to call it the 10 Reasons Not to Change, because the book did come out of my frustration with an industry that just keeps telling people 5 easy steps. That's just BS. There are no 5 easy steps. Well, there are if you're ready to change. But the ready to change thing's the hard part, right? And that comes from having a high level of compassion towards your sameness. Like, I get it. This is why I'm doing this. This is terrifying to me. It makes sense. It makes just as much sense as those self-help books that say, this is why changing makes sense. I'm doing something that's preservative, that's trying to take care of myself. I got to stop it because in the end, it's going to make my life meaningless, but I kind of understand why I'm doing it. Yeah.
Thank you. Very cool. Rabbi, do you have a question?
Yes. I mean, the last thing you said is reminding me of something else which is on my mind, because so much throughout the book and the presentation, I'm thinking about the kinds of things that Jewish communities are likely to say during the high holidays, and in traditional Jewish texts that encourage people to engage in some kind of change, whatever kind of change is necessary for them during the high holidays. There's like a wide emotional spectrum. There's some of them that say the best way to motivate change is like to, berate people into changing. Okay. And then there are other texts like Kol Nidre, which basically says at the beginning of Yom Kippur, we acknowledge that every year we promise some of the same stuff. So we're going to wipe the slate clean and say, we may be saying again the things that we said previously, but we are nullifying the promises that we've made in the past. I wish I knew, I wish I had it at my fingertips, who the Hasidic master is who says the following, but there's some Jewish, a traditional Jewish writer who says something like the model of encouraging people to change by focusing on like diminishing people's self-worth is absolutely the opposite of what one needs to do, because people are only going to be interested in changing at all when they feel like they have enough self-worth in order to make the change. And therefore Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur should be very joyful days, because they're days when everybody can find even the tiniest bit of way that they can change, because that's what's going to be the stepping stone for the next step. And I'd say that the way that your book gives dignity and respect to people at whatever point they are, and that as far as I understand from the book, the way your treatment model also does that, was very inspiring to me.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, along those lines, I'm sorry, you comment, please.
Well, the other thing that you're describing, though, is, when we talked about that force field, the missing element in most people's force field is a community of people giving them the fertile ground to change. And so the high holidays are this moment, right, where there's this coming together, there's social support, there's shared culture, shared language. All these things are they're just so vital towards pushing the person forward, and the other thing is the cruelty of medicalization of our behavior and the self-help industry, because it really is what you described. It really is just a series of insults to people, a series of telling people that they're broken and only experts can fix them, and that something's wrong with them, that they're not asking for help, that if you don't ask for help, you're a bad person. It's a myth that telling people they have brain diseases is destigmatizing. Telling people that have brain diseases is saying you have a brain disease, and if you don't get help, something's wrong with you, even though most of these helps only help so much. And there's part of the book was about that too. I didn't express it so much in the book, but it was a response to the kind of cruel sales pitch that we're getting everywhere we look in our culture now about brokenness.
I have another question, and I want to make sure I don't run over the time, Rabbi, so tell me when it's time for your final remarks. What are the critical elements of going from a bad faith attitude, which is pretending that you have no agency or control of your life, to a good faith attitude, which recognizes your agency and the ability for you to make choices? So I'm introducing two terms that you discuss in the book, and I'm trying to define them, but please.
Redefine, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so these are terms from Sartre, and none of us escape bad faith. We'd go insane if it was all good faith, I'm driving to the store and there's a stop sign. It's my choice whether I stop at that stop sign or not. I mean, life would become insane, but I sound like a broken record, but I think it has to do with the development of your own dignity and your own willingness to be a self, and your own sense that you can survive the pain of being on your own. And I think that those stories were about that too, which is like, I just want to live in bad faith. I just want to go home. I don't want to be the maker of my life and then face the consequences of me being the maker of my life. It terrifies all of us. And every time you do something that's unique and creative with your life that comes from you, you also have to face the terror that you made that happen. There's no excuse at that point. And yet, again, the bigger risk is bad faith. Not doing it is really terrifying. I lived this life without meeting what I could be, you know? Yeah.
I'd like to mention that I felt that your case studies were incredibly helpful and very reflective of the concepts you were trying to convey. So
Thank you.
those worked really well for me. Rabbi, I want to turn it over to you. I think we're coming toward the end.
I think we are. I just want to again say, well, thank you to Ross so much for what you brought to us today, but also to recommend your book to everybody very, very highly. It touched me for my intellectual interest and my professional interest, and also very deeply personally as well. I'm very grateful to all the Minds of Midrash participants over the course of the year, from whom we've learned so much, and just so grateful to Kent and to Razel for the coordination that you've done for the project over the course of this time. It's actually been so energizing that we've, among other things, I mean, we've also talked about what it could look like as a continuation. We are hopeful that we can actually do some of these, do some future such meetings in person, but also other people in our community who work in, let's say, the medical profession or the legal profession have said, so why can't we have a group that talks about Judaism from the perspective of our professional areas of expertise? And so we're exploring that also. And it's just been a very exciting model that we've that we've created here that we can be very, very proud of. And thank you, Ross, very, very much for giving us some insights that will be useful for any of us anytime we are contemplating change, which is all of us frequently.
Well, the bigger thank you comes from me. You all spent time listening to me, which is just a gift. This is so a remarkable gift, and I appreciate that you took the risk of spending your time with me. It means a lot to me. So I really thank you. I'm honored that you did.